They came by the thousands through the untamed wilderness, headed for the gold country. With the discovery of gold in Coloma at Sutter's Mill in 1848, people risked life and limb to travel thousands of miles to stake their claims. Some lasted only days, weeks, or months on the trail or on the seas before seeing their dreams vanish through death, disease, or just plain bad luck. Many people made it to the mineral-rich lands, where they tried to continue life as it had been before. They sought food, clothing, equipment, housing, and companionship. They had made it. A new life had begun.
Shady Grove, my little love, Shady Grove, my old Shady Grove, my little love, I'm going home. Peaches in the summertime, apples in the fall. Now if I can't have little Shady Grove, then I won't have none at all. First time I saw little Shady Grove, she was standing there in the door, shoes and stockings in her hand, little bare feet on the floor. Shady Grove, my little love, Shady Grove, I say, Shady Grove, my little love, I'm going away. I wish I had a big white horse and hay to feed him on. Little Shady Grove could stay at home and feed him when I'm gone. I wish I had a needle and thread fine as I could sew. I'd sew that gal to my coattails and down the road I'd go with Shady Grove, my little love, Shady Grove, my darling, Shady Grove, my little love, I'm going back to Harlan.
Rufus Hitchcock knew what people needed and what he wanted to do. After traveling by land and arriving at Sutter's Fort in 1848, in today's Sacramento, he partnered with John Sutter and opened a boarding house at the fort. He, his wife Nancy, and small family ran this, possibly the first boarding house in Northern California, until they moved to El Dorado County in 1849. After arriving in what was then known as White Oak Township, they purchased the newly built Green Springs Roadhouse on Coloma Road, now known as Green Valley Road, in Rescue. Green Springs House was a welcome sight for the tired and hungry miners on their way to and from Coloma. As a boarding house, it represented a little civilization to the many, often homesick, travelers. In 1850, Rufus Hitchcock built the Pleasant Grove House along the same stretch of road a mile east. It is believed that the wood for this new roadhouse came from the east and was shipped around the Horn of South America. Settling down to business and family life was not to be for the Hitchcocks, however. On April 8, 1851, the dreaded smallpox virus hit White Oak Township. Mr. Hitchcock was struck down and shortly after was laid to rest. Nancy Hitchcock continued to run Green Springs House until the pox returned once again to ravage the area, infecting 17 people. Mrs. Hitchcock and 2 nieces didn't survive. The Green Springs House was sold at auction, and the Pleasant Grove House now had new owners. If these walls could talk, they would have 150 years of stories to tell. Tears of laughter and sorrow stain the wooden floors, and by 2014 it has seen what the ravages of time and human occupation can do. Enlarged in stages over the years, this 320-acre ranch in 1853 consisted of a 20-foot by 60-foot 2-story building with 7 bedrooms, kitchen, dining room, and bar. There was a blacksmith shop and 2 barns that could accommodate 100 head of horses. Above the barn's main section was a 1,160-foot dance floor. At this time, the owner was Timothy Grace, a butcher from Virginia. After selling the ranch to G.A. and H. Wright, Mr. Grace continued to live on the property. By June 1859, the Pleasant Grove House saw ownership by the Sanders family, and the large accommodating ranch was about to take its place in history as a Pony Express station.
The Pony Express only lasted 19 months, but it proved the central route passable year-round. Within a short before it even ended, the Overland Mail came over. Starting in July of 1861, they carried got 16 bags of mail by stagecoach across on the central route, and the Overland Telegraph was built on the central route, and that's what put the Pony Express out of business. But we're here today because the Pony Express is not only history, but it's a legend and it's a romance that represents the Old West. In the letter mail, they carried dispatches from St. Louis, and when the mail that they carried, telegrams, had domestic news and they had international news. When they dropped the telegrams off in Outer Telegraph Station in Carson City, by the time the rider got to Sacramento, the news was in the pages of the Daily Union and the Sacramento Bee and other newspapers. They, just like a newspaper today that has commodity prices, the Daily Alta in San Francisco carried the commodity prices from Chicago that the Pony Express brought. The Pony Express, the news that it carried, it cut in half the amount of time that it took for news to get from the Missouri River to San Francisco. And so that revolutionized the way business was done. And in part, it eliminated the 3-week float, or the 6-week float.
How far would they run the horses?
Horses would go 12 to 15 miles.
At that kind of a pace right there? Pretty good.
8 to 11 miles an hour.
How often did a horse get like a step on a hole, break a leg? And
We don't know that. But you know what happened, and what we get the indication is when they first started, they didn't estimate the distances too well, and they probably ran some horses into the ground, and that's where they kind of consolidated things. What they used as far as eventually they had 190 stations between St. Joe and San Francisco. But a lot of those were contract stations, and they used existing inns and lodges between St. Joe and Salt Lake, but they built them from scratch from Salt Lake to Carson City. If you want to see what one looks like a Ruby Valley station, next time you're through Elko, go down Idaho Street to the Northern Nevada Museum. It's right on the main drag there at Idaho Street, and you'll see it. And it's just a small, that's probably just part of it, but it's just a small shack with what looks like fence posts upright.
Grab her horse very easily. She hops off. She takes my spot, so there's always somebody hanging onto the horse. And this thing usually weighs about 65 pounds, but it's empty right now. So then I help out. Pick that up. Then I take her place. So everybody's got a hold of the horse. Whoop. He just lost the rein. Okay, normally it only takes about 30 seconds. They come in, they go. And then Martin's going to do the same thing. So, give him a hand. 80 miles. 80 miles. So you'll hear people say home station or remount station. A remount station was every 10 to 15 miles. So the rider would get a fresh horse every 10 to 15 miles, and then they would change at what's called a home station. A home station is where the rider. So the rider left Sacramento, he went to Pollock Pines at the Sportsman's Hall, and he would stop, and the next rider would take off and go on into Nevada. So the rider that stopped at Pollock Pines, he would then wait until the rider coming from the east would come in, probably a day, 2 days later, get a fresh horse, pick up the mail pouch, and take off. Because back in 1860, they did it one way at each time.
With the advent of the telegraph, in 1861, the Pony Express disbanded. The country was in turmoil with the beginning of the Civil War.
Will be arriving 1 o'clock. Okay. Make sure of time.
The shout of gold that was heard round the world was drowned out temporarily by the talk of people with news from back home. In September 1864, the new owners of the Pleasant Grove House were the William Wallace Rust Jr. family. Mr. and Mrs. Rust and their small family lived south of the ranch and rented there before buying the property. By March of 1852, William Wallace Rust Jr. had had enough of the rain and floods in the mines to leave the gold for others and go into blacksmithing. As a 22-year-old adventurer, he had sailed from Massachusetts to San Francisco, a trip that took 219 days to look for gold. Landing in San Francisco on April 29, 1850, he found a city overrun with other gold seekers and headed inland. He tried blacksmithing at Oregon Bar, gold mining, and in 1853 moved to Diamond Springs to open a bowling alley. With the multitude of buggies and stagecoaches now traveling Coloma Road, he returned to the lucrative business of shoeing horses. Setting up shop at Green Springs Ranch, he could make $4 a foot for every horse shod. It was a skill he could always depend on for income. William met and married a young Tennessean named Louisa Jane Pitts. The Pitts family made the hazardous journey overland from Missouri. They arrived from the 8-month journey in early 1850, surviving deprivation and constant danger and hardship on the journey. In May of 1856, the newlyweds were witnessing a population boom of families. The dirt road was getting wider, there was a post office in Folsom, and homes and ranches dotted the landscape. The miners who struck out, who could afford it, were heading back east or finding